Today on Northern Revolutions, I've got a special guest. I'll be talking about records with Bob Egan, who was a member of Wilco and Blue Rodeo, among other things. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome to Northern Revolutions. I'm Rob. Welcome back if you're returning. Welcome if you're new. As I mentioned in the intro, I've got a special guest today. I'm going to be sitting down and talking with musician Bob Egan. Bob's a good friend of mine, and he's had a 30-year career as a professional musician. He started out in Chicago. He was a member of the all-country band Freakwater back in the very early 90s. He was with them when they put out this album called Old Paint, which came out in 1995. In the mid-90s, Bob was recruited by Jeff Tweedy from Wilco to come down and join them for some recording sessions, and he ended up becoming a permanent member of the band. In, I believe, 96, Wilco released this album called Being There. Bob plays on this album. Wilco teamed up with Billy Bragg to record what initially started as one album called Mermaid Avenue. This was Wilco and Billy putting music to unfinished Woody Guthrie lyrics. So this was the first of three projects under the Mermaid Avenue banner. This was the only one that Bob plays on because he left the band shortly after this and actually toured with Billy for 6 months. After the tour with Billy Bragg ended, Bob somehow made his way to Canada and ended up joining one of my favorite bands, Blue Rodeo. He started touring with them after the album The Days in Between was released, when their previous pedal steel player, Kim Deschamps, quit the band. So Bob toured in support of that album. And the first album that he actually appeared on was Palace of Gold, which came out in 2002. I love that record. And he was on every Blue Rodeo record for 17 years. This is 2009, The Things We Left Behind. There's Bob standing on the cover there. And there he is on the inside. I've mentioned before, Blue Rodeo is such a institution in Canadian music. And as a member of the band, one of the longest serving members of the band, Bob and the band are inductees into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. Happened about 10 years ago. It's also got a star on the Walk of Fame. This is the last album that Bob appears on. This is called Thousand Arms. And actually inside, there he is there, holding a guitar, and Greg is giving him a little point out there. Bob retired after this album, which came out in 2016. A funny story. When he decided to quit the band, he actually told me before he told the band. I was sitting on my couch one day. It was just after my son had been born, and he sent me a text message letting me know that he was quitting the band. But I had to keep the secret until the band knew. Anyway, Blue Rodeo's Thousand Arms. Additionally, Bob's done tons of session work. He's played with a lot of people, and I have a ton of records that he's on, but I'm not going to show them all. This is one, though, that I think is deserving of showing. I've shown this record before. This is the Sadies in Concert Volume 1, which came out in 2006. This is a star-studded celebration of the Sadies' career. It's very much like the Sadies' version of The Last Waltz. Got a whole bunch of guests on it, whatever. And Bob plays on this record with Blue Rodeo and with the Sadies, and he does get to play with Garth Hudson from the band. Some of the other notable things that he's played on, any fan of Canadian music will have heard, obviously, of the Tragically Hip, probably the most successful band in Canada in the last 30 years. They had an album called Phantom Power, which came out in the mid 2000s, and one of the hits off there is a song called Bob Cajun, which Bob plays pedal steel on. So that's just kind of a highlight of some of the things that Bob's done. I'm quite appreciative that he agreed to come over and sit down and talk about some of the records that has shaped him as a musician. It was a lengthy discussion. We talked for almost 2 hours, so I'm going to break this up into 2 videos. This is part 1. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, welcome my guest Bob Egan. Thank you for joining me, Bob.
Well, you're welcome. Very, very good to be here.
Wonderful. As you know, Northern Revolutions is a channel where we talk about vinyl records. So you being a musician who has been on countless records, I thought it would be an interesting topic for us to sit and chat about some of the records that are influential to you, some of the records that you are fond of, and I just think it's an interesting perspective. I'm a music fan, you're a musician, so interesting to see what a musician, listens to and what you consider to sort of be some of the best records that you own.
Well, it was an interesting offer. I'm very grateful because it gave me a chance to go back through all my vinyl and relive some of my glory days and go, oh yeah, this is really the record, right? And then I decided to cut it down to 20 records, so I had to pull some out that I loved but didn't have that through line of being essential to my musical development.
Nice. What's the first band that sort of got you into music? What's the kind of band that sort of lit the spark?
Well, it was music in general. I grew up, music first came on my radar in the early 60s. And so my older sisters were listening to folk music. So Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Chad Mitchell Trio. Chad Mitchell Trio, who had a banjo player named Jim McGuinn. Okay. Who later changed his name to Roger after he took LSD and became a founding member of the Byrds. Right. So and they were doing traditional folk music that Dylan described so well in Chronicles Volume 1. So that was the earliest thing. And then my father was loved music. We lived in a mining village an hour from the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. Okay. A town so small that the road didn't go through. It literally stopped in the town. One road in, same road out. But yet, in our basement, in this tiny little house, we had a Hammond organ, we had a marimba, and a xylophone, and a steel guitar. Wow. And a record collection. And what he would listen to, and I have no idea how he would get these records, but was what people today would consider world music. Right. So calypso, Harry Belafonte, all kinds of Latin music, and then jazz. So I just remember being surrounded by music in that context.
It's funny that you should say that because my music journey started with my dad too. Yeah. My dad on the wall there, who passed away 13 years ago, was a giant music fan. Didn't play any instruments, had a huge record collection, and I have some of his records in mine, and this part of that is his stereo. And nice. It's funny how we get that from our fathers.
Well, yes, and that we're able to pass that on to our sons.
I hope so. My son hasn't had a lot of interest yet, but
it'll come.
I hope so.
It'll come. And then of course it went. I discovered Top 40 radio, and the station we'd moved to Illinois, and the station was WLS out of Chicago. It was back when AM radio ruled the roost, and so listened to all the Top 40. But then as soon as I started purchasing music or came into my own, it was the Beatles. That was the thing.
That was my gateway too.
Yeah. And I still own, and I bought in real time, this is how old I am, the Beatles 45s when they came out.
Wow.
And yeah, still have those and turned my son onto them. And that's his gateway to music too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. You mentioned your dad had a pedal steel.
Yeah.
Is that what led you to becoming a pedal steel player?
Not at all.
No. Okay. How did that happen?
I don't know.
Oh.
Well, number one.
It's not an instrument typically people think that's an instrument I'm going to pick up.
How on earth did a pedal steel, which, had not traveled far outside of either Nashville or LA or Houston,
right,
make its way up to a mining town in northern Minnesota
Good question.
in the early 60s? There's so many questions about how all of this came about. It was just, and how in a community, and the whole area was settled by Norwegians up there, and Germans, the Europeans. How on earth was my father friends with the only guy with a Latin surname?
Right.
And what was somebody from Mexico doing in northern Minnesota?
Right.
It's just crazy. But it at an early age opened me up to music that was more rhythmically complex.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Very grateful for that.
Nice. You brought some records with you.
I did.
Let's take a walk through and see what sort of tickles your fancy.
Well, you have to start with the Beatles, right?
Right.
And so this is an American compilation, and it was one of the early soundtracks of my life. I had all these singles, but very few of the singles made it onto the albums.
Right.
But this was where I could listen to Beatles long term. And this was just this beautiful era that led into, I think, one of their most glorious eras where they're doing Paperback Writer and Rain. And
I love that sort of transitional between Help and Sgt. Pepper. That
Yeah.
Rubber Soul Revolver era is beautiful.
Yes. And I really love the electric stuff in there because they're really starting to rock out.
Right.
But for me, on this record, they do a Chuck Berry song called Rock and Roll Music.
Yep.
And there is the epitome of the rock vocal that just sums up John Lennon for me. Is on the last chorus. He sings, the band stops, and he hits that hook.
Yep.
Just give me some of that rock and roll music. When he hits rock, he pushes his vocal cords to the rough. Like it's just like sandpaper, and with this grit and gut. And that, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about that one, 2-second moment on this record.
Yeah. So
very influential. I love all the Beatles catalog, but this kind of sums up my probably early adolescence, being 11 or 12 and having hormones surge through me, being interested in girls at the time and the possibilities of life. This is kind of it for me.
Nice. I have the same. I have that the Canadian pressing of that. My dad had the Canadian. It was called Beatlemania with the Beatles, which was their second album. Wasn't available in the U.S. And that was the first one that I grabbed. And it's got some of those great early, sort of American R&B covers on there as well. And like their cover of Please Mr. Postman.
Yeah.
On that album, I was just like, whoa. That was a similar story. That was the one that got me.
They did those songs justice, which is incredible.
Yeah.
4 guys from a working town in in England were able to tap into the feeling and the emotion of these black artists from the States.
Yeah.
Very few people could do those songs well.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah. That's fantastic. What do you have next on your list there?
Well, then we get to high school, and probably the most influential one of them of my life.
Yeah.
It's probably my third version of this one that I've owned. The Allman Brothers Live at the Fillmore East.
Yeah, great album.
Probably one of the certainly in the top 10 live albums of all time. the Allman Brothers were so influential in so many ways to me. I mean, Dwayne, I had a band, and my high school band was called Idlewild South after their first record.
Yep.
And we played the majority of our, set when we played all these high school sock hops and dances was Allman Brothers.
Right.
And I was, they were the gateway to McKinley Morganfield for me.
Okay.
Right? Who wrote most of the songs on this record,
Yep.
or a fair number of them. McKinley Morganfield, of course, is Muddy Waters.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the gateway back to the blues for me. And it was also the gateway to slide guitar.
Okay.
Dwayne Allman, I think one of two of the seminal, most influential slide guitar players in the history of bottleneck guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Just took it to a whole nother level, and his musicianship, his tone, absolutely stunning. And he has been my hero, ever since. Of course, he died quite young.
Yes, he did.
And tragically.
Yep.
But the legacy that he left,
Huge.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right, you go back to, they have a couple anthology records, and he's played with everybody from, Aretha Franklin to Wilson Pickett.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Just stunning guitar work.
Yep.
But the fact that they were able to take the blues and honor them in such an incredible way was just amazing.
Yeah.
And later on in the 70s, I went to see the Allman Brothers, and they actually had Muddy Waters opening for them.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And that was the only time that I got to see Muddy.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was one of the top shows of my life.
Absolutely.
Just a fantastic thing.
Absolutely. I've never owned that album, but I remember when it first came out on CD in maybe not the first time, late 80s or whatever. I bought it for my dad because it was one that he loved. For some reason, I don't have the CD copy anymore. I don't know whatever happened to it after he passed, but fantastic record.
Yes, we had a Friday and Saturday night ritual in high school where we would get the guys, 4 or 5 guys in a Datsun, and we would park in front of the river and do what high school guys do in a car.
Yep.
On the weekend with the windows rolled up.
Right.
Until we listened to the entire record.
Right. Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
It's amazing I'm still alive. So that is etched in my memory.
I did a video last year. It was one of my favorites actually, where I talked about albums that sort of mark the soundtrack of my life, and that's kind of the same thing. There's albums that just, even just looking at the cover art, it sort of takes you back to a certain time and place, and it certainly sounds like that's
Oh yes.
kind of the thing.
Yep. I was defined by music.
Yep.
My whole life.
Yep. The next one of my favorites.
Yes, also one of the top live albums ever in history, in my opinion. Rock of Ages, the band. They are at their fiery peak on this.
Agreed.
It's just stunning musicianship. But what is also so amazing about this is they bring in a horn section.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a New Year's Eve show. Is that at Winterland?
It was at the Academy of Music in New York.
Okay.
It was a 4-night residency that they did. They recorded all 4 nights, and if I'm not mistaken, that version of the album is sort of a highlight of the highlights of the 4 nights sort of combined.
Right.
They did release Live from the Academy of Music on CD about 10 years ago that I think was all the shows. But
Right.
that's kind of a compilation of the 4-night residency, and it's incredible.
It is just stunning. The band are at their peak.
Yeah.
But the horns. So often when bands get in their phase where they bring in a horn section, it's just the band with a horn slapped on top of them.
Right.
And the horns are playing block chords, right? It's the songs work without the horns, right? They're just like a little embellishment.
Mm-hmm.
The horns on this are integral to the interpretation of the songs.
Mm-hmm.
They were arrangements that were written by the Alan Toussaint,
Yep.
right? The famous New Orleans piano player, musician, arranger, mentor to and colleague of Dr. John.
Yep.
Professor Longhair student. Like there's nobody that embodies New Orleans soul and funk and grit as much as Alan Toussaint.
Right.
Incredibly respected fellow. And the story is that on the flight on the way up to the residency, he realized he had forgotten all of the arrangements for the horns.
Yep, I read that.
Yeah, and so that the night before, he wrote them from memory out and gave them to the horn players. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you hear how intricate these are, and what these musicians play cannot all be written on paper.
Mm-hmm.
There were the arrangements, then there was the feel. They are improvising their asses off through here, and it works so seamlessly.
Yeah.
Both with each other and with the band.
The band is, for me, I mean, one of my top 3 favorite artists of all time. And it was the one when again, bring it back to my dad, because it all comes back to him. He was the spark that sort of lit the musical fire for me as I was listening to the Beatles and everything. And I sort of had that tunnel vision. He handed me the band's Brown album, their self-titled album. He goes, just try this.
Right.
Blew me away. And that is still one of my favorites, but Rock of Ages is absolutely incredible. I've got 2 different copies of it here, and I want to eventually pick up the expanded Live from the Academy of Music, just because it's got, a couple extra shows on it. But
well, you can tell from how worn and tattered
all
these are. Like these have gotten, a great life.
Yeah, I have a tattered one, which was my dad's, and then I picked up the Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs version just because it's incredible. I love that, and I also love The Last Waltz because, I mean, I think that's the greatest live album ever made. I love it because the band recorded that after they'd recorded their first 4 albums. The thing I love about The Last Waltz is that's career spanning.
Right.
Obviously, because it's at the end of their career, not to mention the all-star cast of characters that join them on that. But that is just performance for performance. That's incredible.
Yeah, hands down.
Yeah.
Which leads us, of course, to this
another one I love.
Hoary old chestnut. Your listeners, I'm sure, all know this.
Yeah.
You can see how worn the cover is, right?
Well loved.
Well loved. Now, this brings together the 2 last live records. It brings together Allman Brothers and the band.
Yep.
So the story is that when Dylan, after his motorcycle accident, was recording and just hanging out with his buddies, the band up in Big Pink, they recorded the basement tapes. They weren't the basement tapes; they were just them goofing around.
Which I also have.
Yeah, of course. But Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman, made his money by selling performance rights of Dylan's songs to other artists. That's where Dylan made the majority of his money, from covers of his music.
Right.
So Grossman put together acetates of the basement tapes, decades before the basement tapes came out.
Right.
And he shipped them over to England. Took them over to England, left them with Mann's management or publisher, I guess it was. Of course, they recorded Quinn the Eskimo, and had a big hit with that.
Huge hit.
But those acetates made the circles, right? So Harrison got a hold of him, and Clapton got a hold of him, and Clapton later told Robbie Robertson, once I heard those and music from Big Pink, I had to disband Cream. I was done.
Yeah.
Right? He said that was just so amateur compared to what you were doing, right? Which led Clapton then to disband Cream and then come to America and reside in the Mid-South to try to recreate his version of Big Pink.
Right.
Which led him to recording this record, along with his love for George Harrison's wife,
Right.
In Florida at Criterion Studios. And lo and behold, Allman Brothers were playing a show there. They went out and saw him, brought Dwayne back to party. There was a lot of heroin and cocaine, very well documented around the Miami scene at those days, and they partook freely. And the story goes that Dwayne just camped out for the next 4 or 5 days,
Yep.
and they made this classic.
Yep.
The record was going terribly before that. They couldn't get it going. It was just drugs, and Tom Dowd could get nothing that lasted on tape. When Dwayne came in, and at this point Dwayne's 22?
Something like that.
21?
Yeah.
Maybe even 20?
Yeah.
They just lifted their game.
Yeah.
And they created this masterpiece. And
It is.
a big part of this masterpiece is, of course, Dwayne Allman's slide guitar.
Yep.
I mean, the outro to Layla
Mm-hmm.
is well, it just brings up Scorsese movies, of course, but
True.
it is just classic. Now, I have a bit of a connection here because when I lived in Oxford, Mississippi, Bobby Whitlock, the keyboard player on this record and the harmony singer, lived nearby.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and so I would hang out with him a bit in a
Really?
guitar shop I worked in.
Oh,
Oh
wow.
yeah. He was just a regular guy, and he would tell the stories about all this stuff. And one night, a very young North Mississippi All-Stars played a local show. So these are Jim Dickinson's kids. Jim Dickinson, the legendary Memphis producer and piano player, of course, recorded Big Star and all this stuff. Played, I think, piano on Wild Horses with the Stones. They came through to work with him. So his sons, Luther and Cody Dickinson, had a band, the North Mississippi All-Stars. Like, just amazing. They played a local show, and one night Bobby Whitlock and I got up and played with him. I played
Really?
Distorted Lap Steel, and
Wow.
he sang. And I overstayed my welcome and kind of just shit on their show. And if you're listening, North Mississippi All-Stars, 30 years later, I carry the guilt of that night of shitting all over your show. Sorry. I had a lot of fun, but I think you were a little perplexed by me that night. And shortly after that, Bobby Whitlock called me up and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing up in Memphis, this little jam. Why don't you come up and play with me?" And I said, Bobby, I don't know. No, I don't want to do that. I was about an hour and a half south of Memphis. And the next time I saw him, he just reamed me out. He said, "I call Eric Clapton. He shows up. I call you, and you turn me down."
Are you shitting me?
Yeah.
Oh, you idiot.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Oh,
right?
man. 2020 hindsight, though, right?
No, I didn't want to drive to Memphis.
It's only an hour and a half, though.
Well, he was a legend, but he
Right.
was also a local guy.
Right.
Right? I saw him every other week.
Sure.
Right? Bumming around town, we were
Right.
yakking and right. So
Right.
I didn't say this is a chance to do something legendary. What could have been, huh?
Yet I can get him on a YouTube video.
See? Look at that. Look at that.
But he's just a regular guy around town, so. Which brings you to Bob Dylan, I see.
Yeah, so many great Dylan records.
I have to admit, I'm not a Bob Dylan fan. Here's the thing. I appreciate that he is a monster, a god among musicians. Like, I get how absolutely important he is.
Nobel Prize laureate.
Absolutely. I'm still not a fan of his music.
Yeah.
I get how important it is. And I get that he's influenced everybody. I don't own a single Bob Dylan record other than anything he's done with the band. Just not my cup of tea.
Right. Well, I'm sure you have Before the Flood.
I do.
Incredible record.
Incredible record.
Dylan's at his ferocious best.
Yes.
His harmonica playing,
Yes.
stunning. And
Right.
the band's just,
But I only own it because the band's on it.
see.
And maybe that's because I need to delve a little bit deeper into Dylan.
Well, you have to be very, if you're not a Dylan fan, very surgical
Mm-hmm.
because his output is not just genius here, genius there. He is it spans 60 years now.
Right.
His output, and there's a lot of clunkers.
Yeah.
Self-admitted clunkers. Bob was never like going for the hits or this or that. He said, I'm documenting where I'm at, and what I'm going through at this point in my life. And, you know, he legendarily either loved or loathed, primarily loathed, recording.
Right.
So there is genius in different forms all across those 60 years. But I think very few of his records, unless you're a fan, hold up from top to bottom.
Right.
And for me, the one that did, I mean, I learned his songs. They were some of the earliest songs I learned along with the Beatles when I was 12, 13 years old. So they're a real part of my canon. You know, you separate the music from the lyrics, like, and the lyrics are just amazing works of poetry. But then you look at the iconicness of what he did and how important he was, right, to changing folk to rock, for instance. How he broke the barrier of the 3-minute pop song with Like a Rolling Stone.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
There are all these iconic things. How he unabashedly embraced Christianity and took it to the masses, right?
Right.
It's the things that he has done throughout his career are just, well, they're iconic, they're legendary.
Yeah.
And I don't think he set out to do that. He just set out to do his thing.
Yeah.
Which leads us
to that.
Blood on the Tracks.
Yep.
I think top to bottom, one of the finer Bob Dylan records. He recorded this as his marriage from his first wife Sarah was falling apart, and this is seen as one of those breakup divorce records. And the songwriting, the emotion, the melodies, the chord structures, I just brilliant on this album. It's kind of universally acclaimed as a very high watermark. And funny that he tried so hard to record this in different contexts, and it just didn't work for him. He had the New York musicians, and it wasn't happening, and he was back on vacation over the holidays in his farm north of Minneapolis.
Yep.
Called his brother and said, hey, you need a few musicians together, I want to do some recording. Brought in these local Minneapolis musicians, and they re-recorded half the songs on this record. Wow. Yeah, people you've never heard of who don't have, big LA or New York credits type of thing. But the playing is just spot on, in my opinion. And it's an album that, if it doesn't move you emotionally, then I would see your doctor. But I think just a brilliant Dylan record, and certainly a touchstone for me.
Wonderful.
Which leads us to the next Dylan, right? Who doesn't love Bruce? A lot of people, but he...
I'm not a Bruce fan.
Well, we're hitting that part of the show, folks, where we're going to come...
Where you know that I don't know shit about music and he does.
Where we're going to come to fisticuffs.
That's right. That's right.
I was not a fan of Bruce either.
I'm trying to get into him, and I picked up a couple of his albums that I'm getting there.
There's a path.
I've started with some of the mainstream ones, Born to Run.
Yeah. This would be a good starter.
Yeah?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
It was my pathway into Bruce. I was in college when Bruce hit, and all the buzz about, Born to Run and Darkness, right? And he was this guy. But at the same time those records were coming out, punk was hitting. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't into either of those. I was just learning pedal steel guitar. So I was a devotee of Western swing from the 40s and the 50s.
Right.
And I was a purist. And it was the only time in my life I've ever been a purist. And I'll never do that again. Because I missed out on punk and early Springsteen and some of these great things that were happening.
Nice.
after that band, that Western swing band, then I got into more of another covers band, right, in grad school. And the mandolin, violin singer in that band was a big Springsteen fan. And he started to bring me into Springsteen. And I got this record, and it was my Friday night gateway record. So I was in a cover band, and we played every Friday and Saturday night of the year. We played constantly, and we had a van, and the van would show up at my house about 5:30. So at 4:30, I put on a couple burgers on the grill or the stove. I put on the river to amp me up to get ready to get in the van with my brother and my buds and go play in Central Illinois at a little honky tonk.
Nice.
So Bruce was the soundtrack for that. I actually then went to see Bruce on this tour, and it was 4 hours of nonstop gospel. You know, he had a stadium, an arena of people out eating out of the palm of his hand. Just gospel is the only way to describe it. He created this faith or this religion in humanity and the power of the human spirit, and called everybody to testify. I walked out of that show numb from my knees and my elbows down from stomping and clapping. And I was in the rafters, the worst seat in the house.
Right.
And yet I felt like he was touching me.
That's awesome.
Well, I don't think there's a performer alive who can do what he either does now or has done in the past.
Right.
As far as working a crowd. He is a masterful showman. And it comes from the heart. It's the real deal. So the river, I think, is just a great gateway into Springsteen.
Okay.
If you or any of your listeners are looking to go down that path.
All right, I'll give it a shot.
And we will reference this in a couple of records.
All right.
If I had to pick a record that was, in my mind, the epitome of a complete record from top to bottom, it would be this next record.
Okay.
And how the songs are sequenced, how they're arranged, the orchestration, and how it flows so naturally and beautifully from the first song to the last song. I don't think there is a record that does that better than Warren Zevon's first record.
Yep.
Are you a fan of Warren?
I like him. I don't own any. I like him. I like a lot of his songs. I don't know every song. I don't know every album, but I've heard it, and it is a good album. It's a very good album.
Yes. Well, his big hit was Werewolves of London.
Of course. That's one everyone knows.
Yeah, a bit of a toss-off of a song.
There's one song in there I absolutely love, and it's not because it's his version. Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me.
Yes.
Which was covered by Linda Ronstadt, is, I think, the greatest female singer of all time, in my opinion.
I almost had Linda in my pile.
I got a bunch of Linda down there, and I absolutely, not my favorite Linda song, my second favorite Linda song. But anyway, that's my...
Well, the beauty of this record, it was produced by Jackson Browne.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So we're going to get into a little bit of a southern LA type thing.
Okay.
That was my touchstone in the 80s. I just loved the musicians and the production that came out of LA. Some people called it a little slick. I thought it was just craftsmanship. The focus, that's where the Eagles were birthed. It was the focus.
Love the Eagles.
On the songs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but some of the musicians here, he's got the Phil Everly from the Everly Brothers singing harmony. Of course, he's got Jackson Browne singing, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, or Stephanie Nicks as she's called.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The very early days.
Yeah.
He's got Glenn Frey from the Eagles singing. They all kind of hung out. Bobby Keys on sax. Of course, the Stones sax player.
Yep.
Brown Sugar and songs like that. Just a stellar cast and stellar songs on this record.
I'm gonna have to pick it up because, like I said, I've heard it in the past and it's great. I don't have it in the collection.
Yep.
Great record.
It is, and for me, it's the one that hangs together from front to back as the perfect record. Which then ties into, of course, the king of the Southern or the LA scene, Jackson Browne.
Jackson Browne.
He was so influential at that time to so many people. It just kind of is stunning in what he was able to accomplish. And to this day, I saw him a couple of years right before the pandemic at Center in the Square in Kitchener, and
I thought about going to that show, and I kicked myself for not going.
my expectation was very low.
Really?
Yeah, I was just like, okay, yeah, but I was, from note one, he had me.
Yeah.
He was that powerful.
Wow.
Lyrics and melodies. And of course, on this record, also beautiful musicians all throughout here. The musicianship, the songs, just a classic record, in my opinion, one of Jackson's finest. But the guy that ties both these records, the Warren Zevon and the Jackson Browne, and Linda Ronstadt and the Eagles, and so many of the Southern LA people together, is David Lindley. Okay, have a look at this guy. He was the Prince of Polyester. He was the sideman de jour through the 70s and 80s, maybe even 90s, all around the country, but primarily in LA.
I have to admit, before you and I talked the other day, I didn't know who he was. So I had to look him up, and I was impressed with his resume. He's played with everybody.
He has played with everybody, and he had a singular style. Dwayne Allman, primary influence on my slide guitar playing. David Lindley, my guy for lap steel.
Okay.
That was, he could play anything with strings, but his lap steel playing is what he was known for. So most people would know his playing from the Jackson Browne hit Running on Empty.
Yep.
There's kind of a slide guitar lap steel. That's David Lindley.
Oh, okay.
So he would use this distorted lap steel with high sustain in a very almost clean way. And the orchestration that he made happen in a song was just spot on.
Nice.
And this is his first record. He had a minor hit on here with Mercury Blues.
I don't think I know that.
Yeah, it's a 3-chord bang out where he just lets it go with his lap steel. Now, I've been able to see David Lindley a number of times in my life and speak with him several times. His thing was, he was into the cheap guitars.
Okay.
So he would have all the Tiesco Del Reys, and Silvertones, and the Dan Electros, and the Ecos, the Italians. The cheaper, the better.
Right.
And he made them sound like nothing else.
Really?
Yeah, that was his thing. Now, but he also, played the lap steel and then the Weisenborn, the acoustic lap steel type of thing.
Okay,
And one of his proteges, Ben Harper.
Yes.
So Ben Harper does his lap steel thing. It's 90% of that comes from Lindley.
Okay.
I think he was married to Lindley's daughter for a while, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so his whole style came from that. And then David went acoustic for a while, and he would tour with world beat percussion people and play his music with his lap steel and the oud and balalaikas, these different stringed instruments. All great stuff, and one of the funniest guys around.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you talk to anybody, whether it's Ron Stant or Bonnie Raitt or Jackson, all of the Southern LA people that toured with him, they said he's just a great guy.
Nice.
That he would wake up on the tour bus and develop a persona. And then he was that for the day, be it a pirate, right?
Right.
Or whatever he chose to be. It was just everything for a laugh.
Nice.
Everything for a yuck.
Nice. Well, everybody, that's part one of my discussion with Bob Egan. I hope you found that entertaining. That's only half the discussion. Stay tuned. In the next couple days, I will upload the second half of the discussion. Stay tuned for that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Catch you on the flip side.